Good evening, everyone. This is Coach Matt, and you are listening to Better Health and Body Radio, your source for the latest and greatest information and understanding in the world of health, nutrition, and performance, where we give you a seat at the table next to the best and the brightest minds to arm you with the information you need to optimize yourself. Join us for another exciting, thought-provoking episode of BHB Radio, starting now. What's up, guys? This is Coach Coop here with another episode of BHB Radio. We have got another heavyweight tonight. That is right. We are interviewing Gary Taubes. You guys might have heard his name. He is a well-known journalist, a well-known author, and we're going to talk about his latest book, The Case for Keto. That is going to come with a ton of practical takeaway tips for you guys to get started. And we're also going to talk about long-term strategies for different types of folks on the diet, how you should be flexible with it, what we can really pull away from keto, and why Gary personally believes through his own research that this is the diet most ideal and most suited for a bulk of the population. Buckle up. It is a very informative and very helpful ride tonight. All right, Gary, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Hey, Matt, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah. You bet. I'm looking forward to learning selfishly in addition to introducing you to our audience here at BHB Radio. So for everybody at home, Gary Taubes, he is a legend in the nutrition space. He just came out with a book, The Case for Keto. You might know him from his previous book, Why We Get Fat. Gary, what can you tell us about the new book?
Well, it's the book I thought we needed in 2020, 2021 to sort of communicate, to take everyone up to date on what's been happening, and then to communicate how to think about low carb, high fat, ketogenic eating and how to approach it. And one of the things I did for this book, well, when I started my research as a journalist 20 years ago, I'd say there were maybe half a dozen physicians in the country who were prescribing low carb, high fat diets to their patients, variations on keto. And I'd say, half of the Atkins and the Eads who wrote Protein Power, and the Sugar Buster guys, and Arthur Agatston, who was in the process of writing the South Beach Diet. And that was pretty much it. And then they had some followers. Today, I'm estimating that around the world, there's a few tens of thousands of physicians who are eating this way themselves, despite it, their health organizations thinking that keto is somehow inherently unhealthy. And they think this is the best thing they can get their patients to do. And I wanted to understand what they were experiencing, what the challenges were to these doctors, and what the challenges were to their patients, and be able to sort of assimilate what's happening, what we've learned in those 20 years. And that's why I wrote the book. Originally, it was called How to Think About How to Eat.
How to Think About How to Eat.
Yeah.
I like that too. Maybe you can save that for for the next one too.
For the next one.
Oh,
so, and that's really what I want. There's so many there are different diet books, there are different, everybody, one of the points I make in this book is the medical community kind of, to use a non-technical term, they screwed the pooch on obesity. They came up with this idea that it's just caused by eating too much, and if they could tell people to eat less, they have satisfied their obligations. And if their patients or the public didn't lose weight, that's because the patients or the public weren't paying attention or weren't, doing their job, eating less. And so what they did is, and because this fails virtually everyone, they left it up to physicians to figure it out on their own. And the physicians who tried, like Atkins in the 60s, and actually figured it out or came close to figuring it out, they would want to spread the news, make what they've learned available to other people. So everybody writes a diet book. And then when you're a doctor, you got to differentiate your diet book from other diet books. Same if you're a physical trainer or a chiropractor or And one way to do it is with better recipes. But if you're not putting recipes in, you need some kind of, well, Malcolm Gladwell called it a patent claim, something you could say that's different from everyone else. So you get this proliferation of diet books, each one a little bit different. And it's all a lot of, nobody knows, what they should I be eating this version of the diet or that version of the diet? I wanted to kind of put everything in context, simplify everything. To effectively its essence, to what we know for sure, and then take the clinical experience of all these, 120 plus physicians that I interviewed and use that to provide guidance, sort of borrow their brains and their experience in order to communicate how best to do this.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I got it in the mail a couple days ago, and I'm working my way through it. And one of the things that I really appreciated that you said was kind of almost a testimony, in fact, from, I believe it was one of the said physicians, and she said something to the effect of, "This isn't unlike most diets. This isn't a religion. I just feel good."
Yeah, the exact quote. This is from Carrie Doulis, who's a spine surgeon in Ohio. He used to be at the Cleveland Clinic, now in private practice. And Gary comes from a family history of obesity, and she can't tolerate animal sourced foods, and she's a type 1 diabetic, so just a mess. And so what she eventually got to was a ketogenic vegan diet. And what she told me, I was asking her all kinds. Carrie's a wonderful physician, and she's my back surgeon in absentia. Whenever I have a back issue, I'll ask Carrie what to do about it. But what she said, the reason, even just about her vegan diet, it's not based on ethical beliefs or anxiety about climate change, although that works into everything we do. She just said, I feel better. I did it. If I'm eating animals, I don't feel well. My body doesn't tolerate it. And I've slowly taken them out of my diet. And this is what I've gotten to. So it's not a religion. It's just about the way I feel. And I balance her in this chapter with Georgia Ede, who's a psychologist in Western Massachusetts. And Georgia eats a carnivore diet and is ketogenic, and her body doesn't seem to tolerate plant foods.
Hmm.
And they have the exact same dietary beliefs. They're based on the exact same sort of physiological mechanisms and principles. And one's eating a carnivore diet and one's eating a vegan diet because that's what makes their body work. That's what makes them feel good. And so these are the kinds of concepts I wanted to get across to people. The ketogenic aspect of it is minimizing your insulin levels. So the idea that we don't get fat because we eat too much, we get fat because the foods we eat set up a hormonal environment in the body that makes our fat tissue accumulate excess calories as fat. So we fatten because of the hormonal effects of the foods we're eating, not because of the caloric content. And if you want to fix that, you've got to minimize insulin. That's the hormone that dominates fat accumulation. And when you're minimizing insulin, you're eating a ketogenic diet, almost by definition, because one of the things insulin does is inhibits ketone synthesis in the liver. So if you minimize insulin, your liver will generate ketones.
Right. And so what I like about that is that you've essentially created almost like more of a framework rather than kind of just necessarily a rigid structure, although you do give great recommendations too, where someone who, let's say, wanted to eat quality animal meat versus someone who maybe was on the opposite side of that spectrum wanted to take those concepts for blood sugar and then plug and play them into their own lifestyle. Is that right? Kind of making it flexible for everyone?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, ultimately, you know what you have to achieve. I want people, so even backtracking further, again, for 90 years now, the medical establishment's been insisting that people become burdened with obesity because they eat too much, and then they become diabetic because they're obese. So it's always all comes back to eating too much. And as long as you believe it's about eating too much, which the medical establishment ultimately does, it leads to all kinds of bad advice and bad ways to think. So first of all, the advice, the belief is that any diet will work if you eat, it lowers how much your calorie consumption.
Right.
Which isn't true. because it's got to lower your insulin secretion, which is different than calories. So it's not about eating less of, the belief that one of the defining characteristics of an eating disorder is someone who restricts an entire food group. But if this thinking behind a ketogenic diet is true, which, I'm arguing it is and clearly believe it is, then for somebody to achieve and maintain a healthy weight, for a lot of us, we have to abstain from eating an entire food group, carbohydrate-rich foods, sugar, starches, and sweets. So we'll sustain the diet. The conventional wisdom is the diet that works is the one you'll sustain, and the diet you'll sustain is the one that lets you eat all your favorite foods. But if your favorite foods are making you fat, and making you diabetic, that's not a particularly useful dietary approach. So again, I want people to understand this and to understand how we've been taught to think incorrectly about this by, the USDA and their food guide pyramid, and the American Heart Association and their low fat, low saturated fat diets, and the obesity researchers who keep insisting it's all about appetite and how much we eat. And so if I could get people to understand that's wrong, first and foremost, all of that is wrong. I wish it wasn't. My journalism career, though, has been dedicated, and it's an award-winning career, to sort of exposing the bad science and those nutrition and chronic disease beliefs. And then you can learn how to think about it right. And if you learn how to think about it right, then you can pretty much solve the problem on your own. What to eat and what to cook. And then when problems arise, if you don't lose as much weight as you think you should, if you don't get to a healthy weight, then how do you think about the experimentation that has to go on to address your individual issues?
Right. Yeah, in addition to writing something that, so far the book has been I think it's a great on-ramp for anyone getting into it. I also think that it's great for even people who have quite a bit of experience researching or familiar with low carb, high fat to read. I think it's great for all that. It's almost like I felt like throughout the book, you're giving people their own sense of self-agency and autonomy for them to, like you said, learn how to think, as you put it, and then be able to kind of solve their own problems from there, which right. I think is more valuable than just opening up a PDF on the internet and says, hey, eat this way. And and there's really not enough.
Yeah, exactly. Even then, if you think about recipes, so I don't have recipes in the book. I can't cook. Well, I'm learning to cook. I have been learning to cook, but God knows nobody wants my recipes. People act, one of the reasons the establishment will say these diets are unsustainable. Well, first of all, they don't think people can go, more than 3 months without eating a donut. So that makes it unsustainable. But then they also think, well, it's so difficult to understand and to eat in such a way that you can, maintain your insulin low and stay in ketosis. And it's basically like, okay, let's don't eat sugars, grains, and starches unless you're a vegan or a vegetarian. Stay away from beans and legumes, and eat a lot of fat and green vegetables and your animal sourced foods of choice. It's not that. And so you go to a restaurant, if you understand what you're doing, there's no trick to eating a very low carb, high fat diet. It's like, order dinner and tell them to hold the potatoes or the rice or whatever the heck it comes with and give you a double order of vegetables. I mean, you do have to get used to things like eating the meatballs without the spaghetti.
Right.
But, these are all the sort of natural things. You just have to learn how to think about it. And what you're thinking about is how to, more or less rigidly abstain from these carbohydrate-rich foods, because they're the foods that make us fat. And then you also solve this classic problem with diets, which is, people, they'll read a diet book, they'll go on a diet, they'll lose 20 or 30 pounds, or maybe even get down to their goal weight, and then they'll go off the diet, go back to you with some and we all did this, so I can't blame other people. I did the
Sure.
same thing. You know, you get your weight back down and then go back to eating the way you used to. And it's kind of a natural way to think about it if you think that the problem was eating too much, because you're assuming that once you get your weight back down, you fix the eating too much problem, and now you'll somehow eat to be in energy balance. But if you think of the problem as carbohydrates make me fat, uh, then just like cigarettes will give me lung cancer, or drinking Drano will screw up my GI system, you're more likely, it's a lot easier to accept that these are just foods I can't eat. My lean friends can tolerate these foods. They can eat fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, and be as healthy as can be, but my body can't tolerate those foods, so I can't eat them. If I get healthy eating this way, I can't go back to the old way, because I'll get unhealthy as soon as I start eating them again.
Yeah, that's very well said. There's a book that kind of you just reminded me of called another book. It's also a good one called Biochemical Individuality. And so on that note, you and I off the record, we're kind of talking about basketball beforehand. Your son plays. I'm a big fan. I train a lot of basketball guys and work with them. You mentioned you have friends who can get away with eating some of those higher carb foods. In your way of thinking, is there kind of a world in which both possibilities can exist to where, let's say if you're an athlete and you are using more fast twitch muscle fibers, particularly maybe the type 2B fast twitch ones, which are mainly fed glycolytically or through carbs, is there a world in which someone could, let's say, do kind of both things and almost maybe eat more lower carb, higher fat when that's like the energy system they're using on days of rest or things like that, and maybe like an athlete in season or someone who is doing, I don't know, Olympic weightlifting or something like that could benefit from having more carbohydrates on training days?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and certainly the world is full of people who tolerate, young athletes, particularly who tolerate, carbs terrifically well and get their energy from them and all the benefits. I mean, even if you think about them as performance enhancing drugs like sugar,
Mm-hmm.
um, uh, you know, my football career in college got a lot better when I realized that drinking a Coca-Cola before a game was a good thing for me. I was, and back then I also wanted to be as heavy as possible, so there wasn't any flip side to it.
Sure.
But you tell me, I mean, LeBron James, the word was about 5 years ago, he basically went on a ketogenic diet or something like it and lost 20 excess pounds. I don't know if he stuck with it through his, if he still eats that way. I saw a photo the other day of before and after of Victor Oladipo that was 3 weeks apart, basically cleaning up his diet. And the gist of it was getting rid of everything, but, he still ate quinoa, slowly, a low glycemic index grain, but got rid of all the other crap, which is mostly sugary beverages and highly processed grains. And he looked like, I couldn't believe these photos were taken 3 weeks apart. Is this the ideal diet for him in season? And that I don't know. That gets beyond my expertise, and I think beyond anyone's expertise.
Yeah.
I think a lot of trainers know exactly what to tell their patients, their clients, to make them healthier and to have them perform really well in season, but they don't know any better than I do whether there's another way to eat that might improve their performance a little more. And then you're always going to have a trade-off between body fat and not always, but a lot of us are going to have a trade-off in body fat and carbs. Like, would Charles Barkley have been better, the round mound of rebound, had he been eating keto during his playing years and been 30 pounds lighter? Would that have made up for whatever loss of explosiveness he experienced because he didn't have carbs in the glycogen storage to back up?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, all very interesting points. Just to close the loop on LeBron, and actually guys like John Wall too, DeMarcus Cousins, guys that at one point, at least in the latter two's case, had more of a non-ideal body composition. a lot of them, from my understanding, definitely when they were rehabbing and then also in their off season, they tend to follow something a little closer to an ancestral diet, somewhere on the kind of the keto-esque spectrum, we can call it.
Right.
And then in season, they tend to introduce more carbohydrates. Although the encouraging news is that a lot of them, I think, are tending to stay away from things that, are more highly processed, refined sugar, have wheat and gluten, and tend to stick with more like safe starches, like, rice, maybe some fruits, things like that. Which I think is encouraging. If you are going to be someone who is having higher carbohydrates, do you think it's a good idea for you to, kind of almost like Michael Pollan says, like, just eat real food if you're, if you're going to do it?
Well, and that's, I think, for professional athletes, that's the advice I would give. For young college athletes, the question is, where does that advice start to backfire? And, if you're obese, suffer from obesity and or diabetes, and you're just being told to eat real food, but the real food involves, grains and, the pasta in some worlds is a real food, isn't it?
Not mine.
In Italy, it used to be. Totally. So it's sort of, for those people, the moderation message is going to work against their health and achieving, ideal health if they want to make those kind of sacrifices. And that's, again, part of what I'm trying to get people to understand in this book. We tend to get advice from thin, healthy, lean, it's like, I don't need some trainer who has worked his ass off to get up to 170 pounds to tell me how I should eat so that I can get down from 240 to 210. I can get to 240, as an adult. It's funny, even when I was I'm playing Division II college football, when I was a mediocre defensive lineman, and this is the 70s, right? So I ate all the time, and I could get up to my peak playing weight was around, I think I got up to 237, 238. And now in my 60s, I could get to 250 with the blink of an eye just by changing my diet. Back then I had to work constantly and eat constantly. And yeah, I was more physically active because I was, we were doing, but so how I had to eat then to maintain a healthy weight and how I have to eat now to maintain a healthy weight have changed. And you have to understand that as well. The foods I could tolerate when I was, in my 20s and even 30s, I can't tolerate anymore. Right. I could do it. I'd pay the price in weight, blood sugar, blood pressure, lipids, profiles, the whole thing. So. Yeah. You brought up a good point there too. And it's kind of ironic. I used to, like, my journey involved sort of starting in like more mainstream health and fitness as that trainer had to work his way to get up there, giving other people advice. And then what wound up happening was, mainstream health and fitness advice actually made me fairly sick at a pretty young age, like, right around or just a little before I hit my mid-20s. And so, I was more focused on the ratio. Well, yeah, I was more focused on, like, I would say just, getting in enough food, rather than where that food was coming from. I wasn't focused back then at all on anything fasting, low carb, alternating low and high carb, none of that. And so I wound up getting fairly sick, and then it forced me to kind of go down this path, which eventually led me to trying out a lot of different things, functional medicine, mindfulness, fasting, keto, a lot of Ray Peat's work, and trying to reconcile all these things. Yeah, one of the revelations in doing this work that led to this latest book, The Case for Keto. So back in 1998, Malcolm Gladwell wrote a piece for the New Yorker. This is one of his first New Yorker articles on obesity and the obesity epidemic. And he kind of made fun of diet book doctors. And he said, well, diet book doctors, every diet book has the same formula. And the formula is some doctor is talking about how he was going through life and he started getting sick or obese or diabetic or, name your illness. And he tried all the conventional ways to solve it and he failed. And so eventually he buried himself in the stacks of his local medical library and he found, in some dusty tome, something he had never tried before, and he tried it, and lo and behold, he got healthy, or he lost 50 pounds, or, and now he tried it on his patients, and now he's going to tell you what to do based on his experience. And the way Malcolm talked about it, this was like a sales job. This was a con. This is part of the snake oil pitch.
Mm.
But what I realized, especially in interviewing these physicians, is this is what we all go through. So if you're lean and healthy and you're following the conventional thinking on diet, there's no observation you can make to tell you that that conventional thinking is wrong.
Right.
There's nothing you could see or do or understand that would make you ask what else is there, because you're already healthy. It's only those of us who start to get unhealthy, and we'll talk about obesity, but who start to gain weight, for instance, despite all our best efforts, despite eating healthy. And this was the revelation from all these physicians. They were smart people. They had all tried eating healthy. They'd all done the fruits, grains, whole grains, beans, legumes, green vegetables thing. A lot of them had been vegetarians, and some of them had been vegans. They were all, had been athletes. Some of them were world-class athletes, and despite all of this, they kept getting fatter. So they couldn't blame, when your patients keep getting fatter, despite everything you're telling them, you could blame them for not following your advice. When the public keeps getting fat, you could blame them. But when you're the one who keeps getting fatter, you can no longer blame the advice or blame the failure on you, because you know what you're doing. So now you start wondering, maybe I'm getting the wrong information. Maybe I'm, following the wrong advice. And so now with the internet, you go online, you start looking at alternative approaches. If you haven't done a vegetarian diet yet, you do a vegetarian diet. If you haven't gone vegan, you might try paleo or, flexitarian. You might add more olive oil and make your diet more Mediterranean-like. Eventually, you try keto. If none of that works, you try low-carb, high-fat, ketogenic diets. And if that solves the problem, you've just had the conversion experience. And we've all had that conversion experience. And it's not a snake oils pitch. It's just what happens. And what we're saying is it happened to us. It could probably or possibly happen to you. And that's why you should try it. Don't be afraid of it. We now have 100+ clinical trials that tell us that, eating this way is safe. It's probably the most tested dietary pattern in history. When I started, the idea was it was going to give you a heart attack. 20 years ago, I wrote this infamous New York Times Magazine cover story where I had tried Atkins, which is what keto used to be called when I was young. I was described, in the article, sitting in my diner in New York on 12th Street and 6th Avenue, eating a plate of eggs and sausage for breakfast and waiting to have my heart attack. Now, 20 years later, I still worry when I have bacon. But, the clinical trials tell us that you eat this way, your heart disease risk factors improve, your insulin resistance goes away, your blood pressure comes down. Everything gets better. And that's why these doctors, they try it, it works for them, they get healthier, they prescribe it to their patients, it works for their patients. And they say, look, first of all, I didn't go into medicine to manage chronic disease all day long. And that's what medicine is in America in this day and age. So especially family medicine or internal medicine, you're basically, your patients they're suffering from obesity or diabetes or hypertension, and you're giving them meds. And then as they get worse, because these are chronic diseases that get worse, then you up their meds, or you try different meds. So you write prescriptions. And they said that's not why people go to med school. They go to med school because they want to make people healthy. And then they learn that if they can get them to eat this way, they can actually make them healthy, and they can see them get healthier. You don't have to wait 30 years to see if you've died sooner or later from heart disease. You can actually see your patients get healthy. So this idea that, diet books, bringing it back to Malcolm Gladwell, and it's just, that it's not a con. It's just what happens. People try this way of eating, and it changes their life. And thin people can't experience it unless they're sick. because they don't have a life that needs changing.
Right. Yeah, that's very well said on all fronts. And yeah, you're right. I think that for a lot of us, it kind of becomes me search, turns into research, turns into this is how I'm going to help change the world, whether that's kind of the hero's journey sort of ethos all the way to, when they say the struggle is sort of the solution at the same time, in entrepreneurial fields. So I can agree with that. And I think on the bigger picture there too, with regards to medicine, I talked to Tim Noakes on here not too long ago, and then he mentioned he kind of had a bit of a horror story. He's currently training doctors in South Africa to basically proliferate this idea and teach more wellness care instead of just chronic and acute care to change the medical industry. But he mentioned that the establishment, academia, really fought him hard on this, and he had like a multi-year long court battle just to kind of argue for keto. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, no, I am. I know Tim well, and yeah, there's still a world of dietitians who dietitians are not taught how to think; they're taught what to think. It's an entirely different phenomenon. And and what they're taught to think is pretty much the exact opposite of what we're talking about here. They're taught to figure out how to get their patients to eat less and eat more whole grains and fruits and vegetables and all that. And when people come along and they push, they disseminate, a way of thinking that implies, hey, you could eat a saturated fat-rich diet and get healthy, that sounds like quackery to the dietitians of the world. Right. And again, I understand it. I'm not, it does sound like quackery to them. And then they go after it. And then they went after Tim Noakes in South Africa. They've gone after, a few doctors. There's always someone out there who's so convinced of the other way, of the truth of what they're doing, that this is not just quackery. It's like sacrilegious. It's, you should be, put in a somehow publicly shamed and ridiculed for doing doing the opposite of what they believe the truth is. And I get it. The world is full, especially with intractable chronic disease like obesity and diabetes. Those are situations where they're ripe for snake oil salesmen. You can sell hope to people.
Yes,
and from their perspective, they think that's what we're selling. And from our perspective, we're saying, look, try it without buying my book. I don't care. The only reason I wrote the book so you can understand, if you do try it, you'll understand how to do it right. You won't, you won't sabotage your own attempt. You'll know how to do it right, and then you'll do it right, and you'll know really whether the benefits are worth never eating a donut again.
Right.
But yeah. It's an interesting world we live in. And this I don't know if it's a hero's journey, but this trying to convince the establishment that they've made mistakes, critical, tragic mistakes, is an interesting way to spend a life, I have to say.
Yeah, that's very well said in 2020, or very important here in 2020, the year we've had, and then now 2021, where we're not really hearing a lot about preventative health measures that can be taken, including, nutritional interventions to help with immunity and stuff like that. On that note, so, speaking of the establishment taking the opposite perspective, it was announced by Forbes yesterday that Bill Gates is now the single largest owner of farmland in the U.S. Tim Noakes was actually, I don't know if I want to say concerned, but he was very kind of rejected the idea that the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum's ideas about moving towards more plant-based, potentially adding carbon taxes to meat, and in other ways sort of demonizing meat for being not environmentally friendly. He felt like a lot of that research was sort of more of a smokescreen for the real environmental harms caused by things like plastic in the ocean, big oil, big chemical, big pesticide, globalization, big tech, right? And he felt like it was sort of misplaced. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it worries me. The last time I looked, though, even at the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization documents, they're still not as they're not pushing programs quite as severe as the researchers who have embraced the health researchers primarily have embraced vegan, vegetarian, mostly plant or all plant diets, thinking they're the best thing for our health. Um, it's an interesting point in history that we're coming to. I've written an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal that's scheduled at the moment to run January 30th, and I'm making the point that part of the sort of explosion in the plant-based movement over the past 10 years has been in response to climate change and the belief that, right or wrong, that livestock agriculture is an important player in has a unacceptably high climate footprint. And then the keto diet movement, which is a response to another equally scary public health problem, which is the explosion in people with obesity and diabetes. And so you've got these conflicting social movements, one saying, if we're going to solve the obesity and diabetes problem, we got to get people to lower their insulin, and that requires, for many of them, staying away from plant products, or certainly carb-rich plant products. And the other saying, oh, if we're going to solve climate change, we have to, cut livestock agriculture emissions from 14.5% to 12%. I don't know, whatever they think we can accomplish. I think they're more afraid, though, of what's going to happen if as third world economies become more advanced. People who can't afford to eat animals will want to do so, and livestock animal agriculture will just grow more and more prevalent, and that'll be more and more of a problem to climate change. I think these are problems we can solve without having to sacrifice our health to do it.
Yeah.
And these people, because they don't understand the physiological mechanisms at work, they tend to be driven by epidemiologists who do surveys of populations and then tell us how we all should eat. They assume that if we all eat the way they eat, we'll be healthy. And again, that's one of the reasons I wrote this book, is to communicate that that doesn't appear to be the case. And if it's not the case, don't tell us that we should be eating plant-based diets, because if we eat plant-based diets, we're going to either be hungry or obese or diabetic or some combination of the three. And our children are going to have issues as well. And there's got to be a better compromise, a way to save the planet without sacrificing our health to do it.
Right. Yeah, there's a documentary coming out on that. And there's a book I believe I partnered with it called Sacred Cow, talking about how regenerative agriculture is actually something that can be used to help save the planet as well.
Yeah, I mean, there are issues. The regenerative agriculture movement is fascinating, and it's certainly in line with how we think. There are other ways you could mitigate the damage, the climate footprint of livestock, and it's a lot of it, particularly the methane released by beef, seems to me the kind of thing that technology can solve. Doesn't have a long half-life. It's only in the atmosphere for, a decade or two. You solve the problem. That issue is off the table. A lot of this is driven by the animal rights movement, and it always has been. And they have ethical issues, not just with eating animals themselves, but with anyone eating animals. And the environment, I think the environmental issues are driven as much, by the ethical issues is not. And that's something we all have to think about. It's for us to decide, but again, you get
Hey Gary, can you hear me all right? I think I lost you there. Hey Gary, can you hear me all right? I think I lost you there.
Yeah. Hey, Matt. Yeah, we got cut off. I was rambling anyway. Feel free to cut all that out.
It's all good. Yeah, yeah. I was just a little concerned because it seems like, with regards to the whole meat thing, like a lot of the people involved with these world councils on health and nutrition tend to either be involved directly in some sort of corporate influenced way, like investing in fake meat, which is I think actually technically worse for the planet because, and I'm not telling anyone what to do diet ideology wise, feel free to do whatever, but because of its plastic emissions, there's actually a higher death, sort of it's worse per calorie on the environment. And then I've also heard that cow methane is only about 2 to 3% of all environment, all responsible for all emissions, and it has more to do with like some of the farming practices and soil that's a little bit more of an issue.
I mean, everything is, there's a flip side to all of this, and nothing is as simple as people make it out to be. But we unfortunately also live in a world where if you talk about the flip side, you sound as though you don't care about the environment or the planet that our children are inheriting. But even in the US, when you look at the EPA numbers, which I'm going to assume are trustworthy, which could be a mistake. So worldwide, agriculture contributes about 20% of climate change, which sounds like a big number, but we have to eat. Eating is fundamental to survival, so that 1/5 of our climate footprint would come from producing and transporting the foods we eat. It may not be that huge of a number, and it may be the part of it that's least negotiable.
Exactly.
But even then, so about 2/3 of that is livestock worldwide. 1/3 is plant agriculture. In the U.S., the number's a lot less. The number's about 9%, in part because the transport sector and industrial sector is so much higher, which also means you have so many more gains to make there. But of that 9%, the bulk of it is plant agriculture. So I think, yeah, I don't quite understand the argument for not eating, the environmental argument for not eating animal-sourced foods in the United States. But even then, it gets more complicated because when it comes to climate footprint, we're always advocating that. Well, we believe that for health and for the benefit of the animals, you should eat pasture-raised animals. It's much more humane, but pasture-raising animals apparently has a higher climate footprint than the industrial farming that we all find completely unacceptable ethically. And there are a lot of people just pushing simple answers, and I get it. The media makes everything seem terrifying in this day and age. The articles the last day or two have been about 2020 being the hottest year on record. So is that something that should terrify us, and should we do everything humanly possible to, and I don't know, this is my area of expertise by far, but when I look into it, everything turns out to be more complicated and more textured than the animal rights people are arguing. And the foremost is this idea, just so that one of the drivers of the plant-based movement is this Eat Lancet Commission. So Lancet is a British medical journal, and Eat, EAT, is a Swedish not-for-profit that was founded by a physician and his former model wife. And they put together a commission of about 36, 37 world authorities to basically tell us what the healthy diet is for the planet, what the healthy diet is for us. And the conclusion was that luckily it's a win-win proposition. That was their phrase. Win-win proposition. The healthiest diet for the planet is plant-based, and the healthiest diet for us is plant-based. And I don't know if they're right about the planet. I can imagine they are, but I don't know. But I'm pretty confident that they're wrong about us. And so if you think it's a win-win proposition, like Jonathan Safran Foer, who's a novelist turned sort of animal rights activist and environmental activist, and writes these just beautifully written polemics that are written to scare the bejesus out of us and scare us into, vegetarian or vegan diets. And he's absolutely convinced. The argument is it's the healthiest thing you could do for yourself. Why wouldn't you do it? And the answer is because it's not the healthiest thing we can do for ourselves. And that's why. And while you can stay lean and healthy eating this way, I can't. So you're asking me to sacrifice my health. And it's just not as easy. And certainly not, again, sacrifice my children's health. My kids are predisposed to become, overweight and are diabetic as they get older.
Right. Yeah.
Which is probably about half the kids in the country at the moment.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah, I think like you said, it's kind of sort of the cost of doing business in a way, and there's other industry that really is kind of more to blame. And then I've seen some things that seem like that's more what's unfortunately driving some of the anti-meat research, because there's no real like giant one, there's not like there's a big oil, but for big meat, right? That kind of gets to do the same thing and, wave the smoke screen for them too. So I mean, the good news, I think, is that, population has been coming down for a while. So, you just hope that if there is, I'm sure, some environmental impact from the meat, that we look in other areas to kind of, help the environment, which seems more possible.
It's sort of
fuel.
The reason I wrote this book is so people can understand. People who have trouble controlling their weight, their blood sugar, their blood pressure can understand how to eat to, be healthy. And then everything else. So that's my concern, the environmental issues, the ethical issues. I'm going to assume that we're going to work those out after we get healthy. I'm not going to say that most people don't want to sacrifice their health if they don't have to.
Totally. Speaking of that too, and kind of get, circling back to your book, how do you personally tend to eat? What does that look like a given day, let's say?
Well, I mean, I gave up sugar, starches, and grains 20 years ago when I did this experiment for my first New York Times Magazine cover article on obesity. I tried Atkins as an experiment, and it was an interesting one. It worked for me. I mean, I had been gaining 2 pounds a year through my 30s and tried Atkins and lost 25 pounds in 6 weeks. I actually fell off the wagon, but then after I wrote the article, I started to understand the physiology at work. I went back to it. Also, I started to get tired of passing out every day right around this time after my carb-rich lunches. I used to say, I don't take naps, naps take me. And and I pretty much stayed with it. I tried intermittent fasting as an experiment about 3 years ago, which means I stopped eating breakfast and eating after dinner, and I liked the way I felt. I lost about 12 pounds, 10 pounds I didn't think I had to lose.
Wow.
But I liked the way it felt. So in terms of having more energy in the morning, I'm more clear-headed. Even now, I haven't eaten lunch yet, and it's 2:00 California time, and I'm more clear-headed than I would be had I taken my usual break around 12:30 to eat lunch. And everything else is, for the most part, a lot of green leafy vegetables, a lot of broccoli and salads and, animals. Regrettably, my lunch today will be chicken salad without bread, because I like chicken salad without bread. And my dinner, I don't know. We ran out of, I have to go to the market, probably roast chicken and some kind of green vegetables. And that's pretty much the way we eat. My kids, I have a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old, and the 12-year-old's an athlete and likes his carbs, and the 15-year-old is not and tends to shy away from them. And my wife is a mostly vegetarian. So when we make, but she'll eat eggs. So when I make meat for me and the kids, I'll make her a fried egg on a piece of pumpernickel toast. And she restricts her carbs for the most part, because when she did, it allows her to, keep her college weight, which she likes. when she tends to fall off that bandwagon, as she did at the beginning of the the quarantine, the shutdown, when baking every day became the norm, she puts on some weight and then realizes that she's got to go back to doing what she used to do. So.
Oh,
I mean, again, the fundamental idea that I'm trying to communicate with all of this, we don't get fat because we eat too much. We get fat because of the carbohydrates in our diet. Carbohydrates are fattening. It's an old cliche, and it was a cliche because it seems to be true.
Mm-hmm.
And so ultimately, with all the stuff about ketones and ketosis and low carb, high fat, it's about avoiding carbohydrates and replacing those calories with mostly healthy fats from whole foods.
Right. And now, I want to be respectful of your time here, so I just had a couple more things for you, and then we can hop off here. What do you think of some of the encouraging research with exogenous ketones that's coming out? Improving athletes' reaction time, improving. I'm sure there's some sort of neurological mechanism for this, but improving states of anxiety, in addition to the usual benefits you hear about, like longevity. Helping with states of disease. What do you think about that?
I mean, it's fascinating, and I don't quite know what to make of it yet. It makes a lot of sense. You switch your body over, your brain over, particularly from running on carbs to running on ketones. It's a major change, and we can be pretty confident now there aren't any detrimental effects.
Right.
Then the question becomes, what would the benefits be?
Like Jeff Volek, for example, and actually in some fast twitch sports now, and just everyday people going to the gym and lifting weights. It seems like there's almost sort of a natural, like a PED or an ergogenic, right, on performance. So that to me is some pretty exciting research there, not unlike the improving reaction time by as much as 10% studies.
No, I can see, I think our bodies were meant to work on ketones, basically. Ketones and fatty acids, and then glucose from the protein we were eating.
Well, hey, Gary, thank you so much for your time today. I've run us over a little bit. It's been great talking with you about everything from health to human performance. Is there anything else you kind of want to leave people at home with before we give our final farewells?
Other than I wrote the book to help people understand how to think about all this and make it easy and functional, and also to give to their friends and their doctors if they're already doing it, to convince their friends to either think about this themselves, eating low carb, high fat, keto diets, or to get their doctors on board. So,
yeah, very well said. And so everybody, the book is The Case for Keto, Rethinking Weight Control and the Science and Practice of Low Carb, High Fat Eating. If you search The Case for Keto, it comes up. I highly recommend it. And I also recommend checking out Gary's book, Why We Get Fat, as well. If people want to find out more information about you too and kind of dip their toe in, are you online, website, social media, anything like that?
Yeah, I've got a website, GaryTaubes.com, that I don't keep up as much as I should, and I tweet at Gary Taubes. Although I feel the more time spent on Twitter, the less of my soul I have remaining. It's like the primitive populations that used to think that having your photo taken stole your soul.
Yeah.
There's an argument to be made for Twitter there, but
I
okay.
Yeah. Awesome. I appreciated having you on so much. I'm looking forward to finishing or completing the Case for Keto here. Yeah, everybody, if you have any questions, if you're interested in learning more, check out the book. Be sure to catch up with Gary online. And thank you once again for joining us on another episode of Better Health and Body Radio. This is Coach Coop signing off.